previous speaker, what bothered me most was one of the words he had up on the screen. How can anyone say a group like this is unglamorous? I don't understand this. Nothing but glamorous people. We're all attracted to different types of work for different reasons. And I need to explain a little bit about who CDI is. Some of you know who we are, others don't. But some background about where we came from, how we came to our position in the industry, I think is important. My father graduated with a degree in forestry from the University of Georgia in the 1930s. While there, he also handled explosives. Within a decade, he was running a very successful tree business, tree and landscaping business, and a rock drilling and blasting company. One day, he had a contractor come up to him and say, "Can you help me get that chimney down?" This was 1947. He said, "Probably." He said, "I just can't reach it. Can you get it down where I can reach it with my equipment?" These are very important words, "with my equipment." My father lowered the chimney for him, recognized an opportunity, began to market it, and within a decade, he had sold his tree business, he had sold his rock blasting business, and formed Controlled Demolition Incorporated with the intent of serving the demolition industry. What he needed to do was determine exactly what demolition contractors, or some people known as wreckers back in those days, if you didn't understand what critical path management was. And in the early days, he certainly did serve many of the smaller contractors, bringing down structures, hundreds and hundreds of structures over the years, so they could reach them with the equipment that they had. That led to some of the more established, the larger demolition companies trying to block my father's development of the business. They thought he was a threat to them. He wasn't competing with them. He was simply leveling the playing field from a bidding process. When they couldn't block him, they tried to buy him. He wasn't for sale. I came into the company in 1971 with a background in engineering and business. I watched my father come up through a lot of problems in terms of contracting, contract law, difficulties with changing regulations, and keep in mind that this was before we had nearly as much regulation as we have today worldwide. And my focus was on data, information, much the same as the gentleman who just spoke was talking about, data and information. I was interested in tracking failure modes of structures, different types of construction, what type of vibration those structures would cause when they arrive at grade, different types of geotechnical considerations below them. And this data let us refine our capabilities significantly over time. And by 1980, we were spreading very broadly internationally. My brother and I were partners at that point in time. And it spread quickly. Let me give you an example. By region, we worked in 45 countries. It worked out like this. South America, Chile in 1961, Brazil 75, Venezuela 81, Canada, of course, 71. Throughout the Caribbean in the 70s, France, South Africa, Australia 83, 1981, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Japan, Hong Kong in 92, India in 97, and everywhere we went, we met really smart people, good demolishers, good contractors. And everywhere we went, using explosives for usually the first time, something novel in that area, we were opening doors for smart local contractors, some of them blasting contractors, to expand the industry, and they've done a good job of that. There are many companies around the world that do a good job bringing structures down with explosives now. The thing that concerns me is that things have changed dramatically, and they will continue to change. Do you remember when you first started your business, most of the structures you were taking down were of a certain height, maybe 8 to 10 stories, if they were commercial structures, probably cast in situ concrete. If you got into steel structures, you notice most of them were riveted. Then after a few years, you started to see bolted structures begin to appear, and then later on, you see welded steel frames. All of these structures behave differently. All of these structures need to be handled differently. All of these structures have differential failure modes. They weigh differently. Welded structures weigh far less than the earlier riveted structures. So there's so many things in flux with the structures themselves. Now let's take construction methods. Let's take reinforced concrete. Cast in situ, I already mentioned. What about precast concrete? Then we have post-tension concrete, both bonded and unbonded tendon. Are they different? Yes. Do you have to handle them differently? Yes, because there are different risks associated with handling each one of them. Let's take post-tension unbonded tendon, if you're familiar with that. We've done over 30 of those structures in Las Vegas alone, because that was the type of construction that was popular over the years, because it went up quickly, went up inexpensively. If you can't control a structure that's 17 or 18 stories tall, unbonded tendon, post-tension structure, the engineers or the regulators are going to make you shore it, either for several floors or possibly even from the ground up, depending on the regulator you're dealing with. Is that in your client's price? Is that in your budget? Is it that in your client's schedule? These are all things that I think have changed, but nothing has changed more since I started running the company in 1976 than the law, or more specifically, the interpretation of the law. Surely regulations have changed. Regulations in the construction trades, of which we are part, tend to start in Europe, where they have very socialized governments, and they promote worker safety probably before we should here in the United States. And those regulations promulgated over there slowly come across the pond to us, and we need to respond to them and anticipate them. As that process goes on, the regulatory agencies that enforce those respond to the legal system, the judicial system. And no matter what you do, no matter what your undertaking is, if you do anything, you're going to get sued. Now, I've worked in former UK companies or countries where common law is prevalent. Let's take the UK, let's take the US, let's take Canada, Australia, New Zealand. We know what common law works with in terms of strict liability or ultra-hazardous activity. If you handle nuclear materials or you handle explosives, you fall in a different category of common law. Most of you, if you have a problem and someone wants to sue you, they have to prove that you did something wrong to injure them, to hurt them. If what you do falls under strict liability, all they do is sue you, and you have to prove that you didn't hurt them. It's a very different legal bar to rise to. It's problematic, in fact. So while I see demolition continuing, while I see there always being a need for emergency work, such as the one that was mentioned earlier, we were flattered when our work at the Champlain Towers that we performed for Governor DeSantis in Florida was recognized last year. I refused to work on that job until Governor DeSantis granted me immunity against lawsuit. You didn't read about that, did you? There was over $2 billion in lawsuits on that collapse. A lot of companies went out of business. Those companies that went out of business had absolutely nothing to do with the collapse. But the legal system in our litigious society here, under common law, doesn't take that into account. They're simply interested in winning. So as I look at what's happening, you're going to have emergency jobs, but where an emergency job comes up, you're going to have latitude to protect yourself from litigation, as I just mentioned. You're going to have structures that you just can't reach with your equipment, despite this beautiful equipment that is reaching higher and higher above grade with the high reaches now getting up over 200 feet. Eventually, they're not going to get any higher, and something's got to get those structures down. Where explosives can do it, explosives is a good choice if the structure has enough room around it to accommodate the volume of debris that's being generated by felling the structure, and if the nature of the surrounding community can tolerate an explosives demolition operation. I mentioned differential type of construction. I mentioned post-tensioning, unbonded tenons specifically. Once again, that is a type of construction where if you can't use an explosives approach, it is going to cost your client considerably more money, and it's going to increase the risk to your workers and the public, because risk is associated with duration of exposure to something that can hurt you. And post-tension construction, because it is so responsive, I love it, because it's got energy built into the tenons that I can use, but it is not your friend from a conventional demolition standpoint. So we look at different structures that lend themselves to explosives for different reasons in different circumstances and say, how is this going to continue in our culture, in our society, as we get more and different types of construction that haven't been demolished before? This industry is going to innovate ways to handle it, just like the ultra-high reaches are being designed and built to reach taller structures. What's not going to change is the regulatory propensity to back away from conflict with litigation. Right now, I'm in 4 lawsuits totaling over $30 million. And on those projects, I did exactly what I was supposed to do in each one without fail. And all of that litigation is a function of work that was outside my scope. And despite the fact that my contract says that my client will defend, indemnify, and hold me harmless and name me as additionally insured on their insurance by endorsement for claims arising outside of my scope of work, it doesn't stop me from getting sued. I spent 5 hours testifying on a project Monday before coming here. It's taking all my time. I honestly don't know that there is going to be an explosives demolition industry in the United States in 10 years. I hate to say that. I've got children in the business. Well, they're not children anymore. They're grown. I have corporate family in the business, but I don't know whether or not regulatory agencies will resist the onslaught of litigation and the fear of censure by not doing things adequately to prevent the opportunity for that litigation to occur and to throw acid onto it. What comes into play is politics. The legal world knows how to play politics, and they reach high and they reach quickly, and all hell breaks loose from the top down. And when that happens, everyone backs up, takes a deep breath, and says, am I under scrutiny? Am I going to get in trouble if I don't hammer these people for what went wrong? Oh, never mind whether or not they were responsible for it, but I've got to cite somebody. That concerns me more than anything else, more than new types of construction, more than problems with contracting, changes in getting paid, changes in the economy, reduction in volume of work. You can roll with those punches, but what you can't get away from is regulation and litigation. So I think the lesson that we've learned, we've taken down structures over 2,000 feet tall, 40 miles of bridges if you add them up, end to end, thousands of structures. We've never changed from my father's original principle. He was not interested in explosives one bit. He was fascinated by all of those American elm trees that were killed by the Dutch elm disease when he had a tree business back in the 1930s. What he enjoyed was learning how to change the weight balance in a structure. He learned how to create different hinges. He learned how to dynamically manipulate the fall of the structure, differentially change the velocity of fall, the direction of fall, right in mid-fall. And all of that information went with him to chimneys, to buildings, everything. We have always been striving to use energy, but it's the stored potential energy in a structure that we use. That stored potential energy, when you lift those materials up into place, or when a tree grows, the energy that grows the tree, it's stored there for somebody to use. If you can release it, it becomes kinetic energy. You can use that to control the direction of fall, the velocity of fall. You can use that to change the fragmentation of debris on the way down if you bring the structure to grade. The only problem is the way to release that energy is with about that much explosives. 1/1,000,000th of 1% of the energy being dissipated when a 40-story structure comes down. And yet it is that tiny little bit of explosives that brings strict liability of common law and litigation to the fore. So last year I spoke to National Demolition Association board meeting in Maine, and I was really blessed to speak with two very capable gentlemen from ASI and Thornton Tomasetti regarding modeling. And they described their capabilities, which are extraordinary, just really impressive. And when they were finished, I was quiet, and I looked over to the moderator, and I took my hand and I slapped the table as hard as I could. Got everybody's attention. And I said, folks, you've heard these gentlemen talk about modeling, about noise, about vibration, about structural control. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you don't have something that's vibration sensitive next door. It doesn't matter if you're in the middle of a field. You don't have to control where the structure falls. It is very structure and site specific. So whilst all of these capabilities are being generated, we have tugging at our shirt tails. Should I even be in this business? I know what I can do. We worked decades tracking all types of failure mode structures, vibration, and the like, decades. I know what I would like to do. I'd like to help solve problems. That's my passion. I really enjoy it. I like to keep people safe by using a safer method. I like to let people make a better profit by using a quicker method. But I've also learned what I shouldn't do. And what I shouldn't do, what any business person shouldn't do, regardless of what you know, is put yourself in harm's way with regard to litigation. It sneaks up behind you. It's most prevalent here in the US with our litigious society. I've worked under Sharia law, I worked under Napoleonic law. You don't see those problems, and you don't even see the problems to the extent that we have in the US in other former Commonwealth countries. I've never been sued in Australia, New Zealand. No, never been sued in the UK. But now I'm sued on every third job here, even though I did my job properly. So the question is, do I want to keep doing it? I don't know. But one thing I can tell you is this. If you are looking, here at least in the United States, for an explosives demolition contractor to assist you with all the wonderful things they can bring to your project, please be aware that they're in a very different place than you are from a liability standpoint. Please be aware that they're going to ask you to assume responsibility above and beyond what you expect for things that happen outside their scope. Because under ultra-hazardous activity, they have no means of defense against litigation. They're sitting ducks. I appreciate the opportunity to say this to you. Steve, he said, we'd like you to speak. A lot of people mention your name. Well, that's flattering. That's nice. I said, what do you want me to talk about, Steve? And he said, whatever you want. I went, okay. And I said, it'll involve demolition and explosives. He said, that'll do. And finally, when I spoke to him before coming up here, and I said, I'm going to say some things that some people in the room won't like. He said, that's okay. They go right to cocktail hour from there. They'll be fine. So I've said my piece. I've told you what I think. There is a very definite place for explosives demolition when carried out by qualified contractors on specific projects. Be cautious if you use it. Think carefully whether or not it puts you in harm's way. And if we should get the opportunity to work with you anywhere, this country or elsewhere in the world, it'd be a pleasure. And I look forward to getting to know you better. Thank you very much.
Questions? Put him on the spot. He's here now, he's free. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Do it. Down at the front here. Oh, sorry, the light blinded me there.
Hello, Mark. Joel Spiritus, what would you suggest was the most difficult project you might have experienced over the last 35 or 40 years?
What was the last?
Most interesting? For us, the most interesting project is where the mic. I would say.
Oh, come up to the mic.
Microphone.
You want to come up to your mic? Yep.
I told you it was just a chat. I'm not used to talking. So, what was the most interesting project I've worked on in the last 30, 40 years? I would say the project where we could provide the most help. One of those was the Murrah Federal Building bombing. It was devastating for Americans. I had employees, including my daughter, that refused to go to the project site. She couldn't tolerate the teddy bears and pictures that were on the fence around the site because of the children lost. We helped secure the building. We worked with some really good contractors in the Midwest. And we were very surprised when the mayor of Oklahoma City asked us if we could implode the building. And I was actually shocked. Excuse me, sir. He said, can you take the building down quickly now that we've recovered the bodies? I said, we could, but you just had a bombing. And he said, out of sight, out of mind. The second building that comes to mind was the one that we were cited for last year, was the partial failure of the Champlain Towers in Surfside, Florida. Tragic, had the world's attention. And there were people that were missing. And we were asked, can you take the building down, even if there are people in the debris pile? I looked at it, I said, yes. But I will only do it if I have immunity against litigation because of the lawsuits that will follow. That caused quite a stir. I got yelled at a lot by people in Florida, governor's office. But I've just explained to you the position that we were in. Yes, I can help, but should I, if it's going to put me out of business? They came up with immunity. We proceeded, didn't drop any debris on the pile. Unfortunately, they didn't find anyone else, but at least there was hope for families missing loved ones for a while, and that's good. If it comes to technically challenging buildings, it's always challenging when you come up against a new type of construction. I mentioned post-tension construction. I love it. It has so much energy in those tendons to play with. It's just a function of how do you use it efficiently to move that structure quickly. It's a bane to your existence, I know. I often ask a contractor, in fact, I asked a contractor this morning about a job in Florida. She said, can you take this structure down? Yes. And I said, how will you make the most profit, if I implode the building or you take it down with a high reach? And she said, well, I would make more money taking it down with a high reach. I said, why don't you do that? Why don't you take the building down safely where you make the most money and put the money in your pocket rather than giving part of it to me? That's my attitude. If I can't be part of a solution to your problem, to your benefit, I don't want to be there. I'd rather be someplace else. So these are things that satisfy someone like me. I love new people. I love smart people. I love innovative people. I love the opportunity to do new things, have different challenges. But all I can do is wait for you to bring them to me. And I hope you do.
Thank you. Wayne, you've got the last question.
Mark, over 20 years ago, you were in Liverpool, Bootle, and you took down the former Inland Revenue building, which really upset the people of Liverpool. Not. But I recall, Mark, Molens, who was your client, were given a lot of pressure because the processes in the US were different than the processes and the codes in the UK. And they were talking about noise, they were talking about safe zones and exclusion zones. And the director of Molam's came to me and said, Wayne, we're thinking of just doing this reverse to construction, some mini and midi excavators. And I said, no, you mustn't do that, because this can come down safely using explosives. And I get it, there's barriers there. And we need people like you. We need people like David Sinclair. We need to use explosives when it's appropriate, not putting people work at height. So please don't give up. Don't stop. Get your indemnities, get your insurances in, and just carry on, because that was a 200-foot building. It was a difficult building. There was a new Inland Revenue building next door, and it was right opposite the regulators, HSEs, the Health and Safety Executive offices. And I remember it coming down, and I remember what you did. You did a good job, but it was close to going to putting boys and girls, work at height, floor by floor. Shouldn't have happened. There was enough space around it, which is the point you were making before. So, do you remember that?
Do I remember St. John's House in Bootle, Liverpool for John Molam and Company next to the HSC headquarters? No, I don't.
You don't. Well, the Inland Revenue remember it, and I'll tell you, Ken Dodd remembered it because he wanted to press the button. And John Molam said to me, what do you think? I said, don't let him anywhere near that button because Inland Revenue will be all over you. Anyway, I'm finishing on that point.
But you're kind, and I will say this about that project. By that time, there were a couple of UK companies that were using explosives, and they were doing just fine. You know their names. And a crowd of them were on a hilltop not far from the St. John's House, and they were all standing around like this.
Yeah. They were upset they didn't get the job.
So happens I had a photographer up on that hill, and the building went down as it was supposed to.
Right.
They all didn't say a word. They just turned and walked away. You know, it's good to be proud. It's good to be really focused on you, your country, your capabilities. But you also need to respect people that maybe know something different, not better, but just maybe know something different. And you can do the same thing. I might be coming in and opening doors for blasting companies around the world. That's great. That's wonderful. Just do a good job with it. You can do the same thing. You open doors. Let new things come into your businesses. Let new young people come in. They're different. Believe me, I've employed some of them. But you know what? They're good kids. They've got a future. And I'll take you with what you said. I'd like to stay in business. Let's see if I can.
Thank you very much, Mark.